Welcome to this episode of Unstructured Unlocked. I'm your host, Chris Wells, VP of Research and Development at Indico Data. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Meno Hellis. Meno, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me, Chris. It's really, welcome for you to have me on this show. And I'm really excited to share some of my experiences and thoughts on data and unstructured data. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, thanks for taking out the time. Let's start with a few, who are you, what do you work on types of questions. Does that sound good?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a digital transformation expert. I've started my career with a fintech company called IRESS Market Technology, which is kind of the equivalent of Bloomberg in Australia and New Zealand, but then moved on to spend the biggest chunk of my career in fund administration within the domain of data management, digital transformation, business process management. I then moved into Manulife to work on a similar capacity, focusing on digitalizations for operations. And I continue to work as an advisor and a consultant to financial services that are trying to really get around some of the data challenges, specifically document management and business process management.
Great. So you've seen the data analytics and automation space from all sides, it sounds like.
Right. Probably more than I would like to, but yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I want to dig into a lot of that, of course, but let's start really high level and talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of what I would call the mandate for the Automation Center of Excellence in the industry today.
So, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Center of Excellence, because that is a step zero when it comes to any kind of automation. Because I think, in my experience, I've seen various arrangements, but the simplest and most successful is to start with a Center of Excellence, basically bringing together a group of cross-functional talent and giving them a sense of purpose and rallying them and as a driving force to do something and solve a problem within the organization, such as, for example, an automation, process automation, digital transformation. And it has to be kind of sort of layered within an overall, strategy, as far as, if you think about it, digital transformation, business architecture, and then you have this capability that's called the Center of Excellence as a process automation. So the key step, or step zero, is to create that Center of Excellence.
Yep. You mentioned digital transformation, which is one of those buzzwords, and it's been a buzzword for, I don't know, probably about a decade now, at least. Yeah. Where do you think, especially in the financial services vertical, where do you think we are on that industry journey to digital transformation?
So I think there's been a lot of progress that has been made over the last 10 years, I would say. But then I think what's happening, there's a lot more challenges, and a lot more scope is being defined, especially, in space where I am, in wealth management and both retail and institutional. A lot of things are being disrupted. There's changes in demographics, there's changes in technology, there's changes in customer needs. And that's opening up more and more challenges and opportunities for digital transformation. But that said, I think, in parallel, the advance of technology has done well, and therefore there's tremendous growth happening in digital transformation. But where I see it right now, I think it's a core strategy of any company and any organization that's trying to be client-centric. You have to have it as part of your corporate strategy. You have to have it as part of your operational strategy, and it has to be part of the culture for it to be really solid and be foundational.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Rising interest rates and inflation would have nothing to do with any of that, I guess, right?
No, yeah. I mean, it probably will make the cost of talent, because this is an area where, digital transformation, especially if you're looking for, let's say, analytics, data scientists, software engineers, those are going to cost more because there'll be wage pressure. But, from an overall, it has nothing to do with it seems. But obviously, it does impact, because whichever program you're running, whether it be a regulatory or digital transformation, it's the people that make the difference. And those people are under pressure now. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned challenges, and I definitely want to hit that. But for a moment, let's drill down to the CoE a little bit more.
Sure.
You talked about business strategy and then architecture, and then the CoE sits under that. So, and that often means relationships with a lot of departments throughout the company for the CoE to manage. What have you seen work really well and work really poorly in terms of the way the CoE interfaces with business units?
That's a great question. I think so setting up the CoE is the easy part.
Okay.
The maintaining it, setting up a proper governance for it, and a roadmap, and clearly defining the roles and responsibilities is the tricky part. And evolving it so that it's a continuous improvement, because at the end of the day, this particular shared service or CE is working with emerging technologies. It's also working with emerging problems that are being defined. Right? We're not trying to solve accounting problems, that have been around for a long time, where we've had decades, to figure out what the standard operating procedures. Most of the problems that are being brought forward to us are problems that have not been solved before, or not, solved for a long time, and therefore there needs to be a culture and a mindset of learning, so that as the CoE does one project or does one process automations, there's reflection. It can learn how to do this better next time, faster, maybe more cost effectively. So that's an important element of that CoE, because you can set up the structure, but then the structure isn't really, it's very static. It's not learning. It's not really evolving to adapt with the changing business needs. Especially, for example, in spaces that are changing rapidly, like let's say retail, or media, or or wealth management, or if something it's regulatory changing quite fast. The CoE needs to evolve so that it can align its practices, processes, and frameworks to continue to manage those changes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Is that RPA has been around for, I don't know, itself almost a decade now, right? And that's one obviously important tool in a CoE for automation, but the tools are still growing and changing, and there are lots of new entrants to the market all the time.
For sure, yeah. The organizational setup is important, and you bring up a very good aspect of it. I think organizationally, like I said, it needs to be open for learning, experimentation. It has to have the right mindset and attitude. But also from a technology, like you mentioned, there's always a flavor of the month, right? It could be RPA now, it could be analytics, visualization. It's important to have a tech stack that is continuously being, examined. Is this the right tech stack? And look for tech stack that's open architecture that allows you to scale and switch if you see that there's a different and a better technology out there that can better match your needs.
Yeah, a lot of the platforms out there sell themselves as, oh, this is it. You just need this tool. And you said tech stack, which makes me really happy, because you really do need a tech stack for automation. There's no one tool that does everything.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. So looking at it from the other side now, in terms of the business units, what do you see business units do wrong most often in the way that they interface with the CoE?
So I think they a lot of the mistakes that I've seen and the challenges that they expect that this is something that can be achieved fairly quickly, and that there's a lot of tools out there, and I think they've seen a lot of buzzwords and talks about technology can do a lot of things, and I've worked with platforms that are described as low code and no code, and they make a lot of promises as far as, well, you don't really need technology, you don't really need software engineers. This is just a point and click and drag and drop. You can get your operation analyst to build end-to-end applications or enterprise applications, and that actually, unfortunately, has created some kind of false hopes, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
so
totally.
The business leaders now expect that things can happen fairly quick, and expect that things can be developed. Application delivery is going to cost them a fraction of what you used to, because apparently everybody is an app developer these days, right? And in my experience, that
Yeah.
is a very dangerous assumption to make, because if you want to build an enterprise application, if you want to solve for automation end to end, you need technology partnerships, especially for critical elements like security, performance, right? There is a portion of application delivery that can no doubt be delivered by what we call the citizen developer,
Yeah.
which is your operation analysts that have been upskilled to do the UI, to do maybe the business rules. But the biggest chunk of the work, it will continue to be delivered by professionally trained technical expertise, right? So that's one aspect, the cost and what it takes to develop an application or process automation. The other aspect, of course, is, especially in the space of document management and unstructured data, and you're dealing with, let's say, volumes of forms that are, paper forms. It's the solutions out there are amazing, but they need to be trained. They're no different than your processes, right? Just like when you're onboarding an employee, you need to train them, and you need to supervise them, right? And you need to give them good examples and bad examples so that they know what to do the next time. The technology is no different. It needs time to learn what it needs to do, and I think that it hasn't gone down well. It hasn't been explained well, I should say, to the business. I think people expect that from deployment day that this knows how to do everything.
Yeah. No, I'll say for my own part at Indico, we work with unstructured data and automations, and for a long time, our marketing looked a lot like the RPA vendors' marketing, and so part of that was because we wanted to sound familiar, but it was a blessing and a curse in that we're not RPA, and they're very different things.
Right. Yeah. And RPA is a great example where I think a lot have been misled, in the sense that I've seen many organizations and operations heads where for a long time they measured their success when it came to RPAs, or how many bots are out there actively working. But at the end of the day, what are they doing, right? And are they fully utilized, right? If you have a bot that's running, an end of day process or start of day process that just runs 1 hour at the start of the day and 1 hour at the end of the day, right? Is a really efficient bot, right? You have to think of them as a virtual agent, right? Or as a digital worker, right? You're paying for them. And the cost, from my experience, is not much less than an offshore resource, right? And you have to ask yourself, does it really matter if you're running 2,000 bots if each one of them is running at a capacity of 10% or 5%, right? So the utilization is more important. And similar errors, or similar, I think, nuances are happening in other technologies, whether it be document management or OCR or ICR. I think people can easily make the wrong, assumptions, or use the wrong metrics. So as a business leader, you really have to know what are you trying to accomplish, and have your objectives clear from the start, and metrics clear from the start, so they know whether you have a strong business case or not.
Yeah, that's a great point. I see it all the time, both in business units and in COEs, where there isn't a clearly defined return on investment that they're trying to get out of their bots or their automations or workflows or whatever you want to call it. And so, they default to, like you mentioned, right? Like, it's easy to measure the number of bots in production. So you default to stuff that's easy to measure, like accuracy, but accuracy doesn't tell you how much money you're saving or how much capacity you've created, right? It's table stakes. You have to be accurate. So that raises, I was going to save this hot potato for closer to the end, but I'll just ask it. Has RPA, in your opinion, delivered on its promises? You mentioned the citizen developer thing, and of course, there are armies of RPA developers now. Has RPA delivered?
I think it's it's one of those questions where it really depends on where you've deployed your RPA and what is your tech strategy, right? So, like you pointed out, right, you cannot. There isn't really, there are many, platforms that are just one place or one-stop shop where you can do everything, right? So if you're deploying RPA as part of a combination or a tech stack, right, that you have for, let's say, to address the here and now, because that's where RPA originally came. It originally came about because there is there's a long time to wait and for the long-term solution, right? So to give you an example from the experiences, the problems that I've solved, right? We might be building a digital pool so that we have a first, digital intake for all of our account maintenance and services,
Yep.
right? But that's going to take a long time because once you're dealing with external users, right, then you have to engage risk, marketing, customer experience, right, and a multitude of stakeholders. And it's a larger project that's going to take a long time. But then what do you do with the here and now, right? How do you address the people that are wallowing in pain, addressing the problems that are coming out of the current solution, which is, it's legacy, it's manual, it's laborious. So that's how RPA came about. It solved that problem because it basically mimics the actions of human beings going into an application record-keeping system, clicking the buttons and so on, as a tactical solution until the strategic solution is being built. And I've seen, RPA gone wrong where people have used RPA for a strategic solution, right? Or they've used it in tactical ways where it didn't make complete sense, or they've used it as to do everything from A to Z, right? And you really need to use it to more of a specific pointed problem and to address what I just described instead of just, well, I can use RPA for visualization, I can use it for reporting, and I can use it for reconciliation. That doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
You have to have really specific purpose for what you're using your RPA. You have to have proper governance to make sure that before you're provisioning any bots, right, you really have an idea how they're going to be utilized.
Oh, yeah.
Process that we're going to be doing. You have to have the proper risk controls and balances in place because, I've been in situations where, bots were basically transferring data for the bank and insurance, for example, or transferring data from, Canada to the US, and there's data residency, regulations that are being, right? So you kind of have to really be careful, about all these things and make sure that it's deployed in the correct and in the proper way. So it has a good promises. It can yield benefits for sure if used correctly.
Yeah, I really like the point you make about governance. It's not a surprise that you're making it coming out of insurance and banking, but I think that's one of the biggest hidden costs of automation platforms is when folks get into this and they say, oh, well, I'm just gonna, I'll build a bot and it'll do A, B, and C. Well, who's gonna make sure down the road 9 months from now that it did A, B, and C the right way on this day at this time, right? You have to, it has to be auditable.
Right. Yeah. You have to treat, especially when it comes to RPA, maybe other technologies not so much, but because the nature of our RPA, they mimic the human actions. It's basically just another user that you're onboarding. So you have to give them a user account, you have to provision them what they can access, what they can't access. They are no different at the end of the day.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. Should think about them the same way. All right, we've covered like some really broad stuff. Let's zoom in on you a little bit, Meno, and why don't you tell me about maybe your personal philosophy or process for finding the best candidates for for process automation?
Sure. So I think, when you're dealing with, so once you have a COE, which is important, so the organization setup is, like I said, is step 0. And I think, the talent that you bring in, the mindset, the attitudes is also important. Then you go into the execution part, which is, how do we find those, good opportunities that can yield, good value? And what you need to accomplish that is more of a standardized approach and a methodology that can help your organization, evaluate and prioritize those opportunities. So when you have this in place, you'll be able to quickly establish and utilize, let's say, a defined set of criteria that you can use to determine which processes are good candidates, which for automation, and then you can evaluate those candidates to measure their potential benefits, if that makes sense. What I've used in the past is a simple, and I think keeping it simple would help for practical reasons and for efficiency purposes. To find the fit, you have to recognize that not all processes are created equal. And good candidates share some common characteristics, what I would call. So when you identify those opportunities for automation, typically you look for ones that require manual interaction with one or more IT systems or applications. that they are repetitive in nature, that they occur with significant frequency, for example, and that, as much as possible, they include logic and rule-based. So there isn't really a lot
Yep.
of human judgment, and maybe, although the technology is advancing, but if you want to maximize the benefit, you definitely want to look for something that's logic and rule-based, and that it's prone to human error. So if there's a lot of dexterity and manual
Interesting.
entry, you know what I mean? And if it can be performed after hours, if there's a flexibility when it can be performed, these are additional pluses, and it's time consuming to perform, right? So those are typically criteria that you'd look for, and when you're qualifying the opportunities. So once you look at all these kind of sort of artifacts that you've collected, you can map in well, I used to have some kind of an automation heat map to process automation heat map. And we use kind of similar quadrant, if you're familiar with the Gartner, 4 quadrants.
Yep.
So we'd have the bottom left quadrant is the lowest priority candidates. And those are ones basically they're high in complexity and low in value, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the opposite quadrant, which is the top right quadrant, is the highest priority candidates. So those are basically, they're high in value and low in complexity. So if you have, for example, let's say an invoice processing process, it's significant in terms of volume, it's significant in terms of frequency, yet it's valuable because if you don't attend to your invoices, then you're basically leaving money on the table, right? That should be in your top, right quadrant, because that's one of your highest priorities, right? And then the other 2 quadrants that are basically the top on the left and the bottom on the right, these are the medium priority. Either they are high value but then high complexity, or low value and low complexity, if that makes sense. So if you just kind of sort of collect these artifacts and then map them into the various quadrants, that gives you kind of sort of a visual way to immediately figure out which ones you need to hit first, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you've got your roadmap, right? Work from the top right, and then hit the other quadrants until you get to nothing left worth automating. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think so. You don't want to complicate it and go beyond that kind of simplicity. I've seen different versions of, automation heat maps, and you can have different criteria. It doesn't have to be this, but as long as it's something that for sure that can guarantee that you're selecting the top, opportunities first, right? And it's something that's repeatable, procedural, basically, then that can function, right? But if you complicate it too much, where you're spending so much time to try and figure out which processes are the ones that you need to, then that's basically, valuable time that's being lost.
Absolutely. Yeah, that analysis is probably the most expensive part of the process,
right,
in getting there. One thing you mentioned, very specific, I wanted to drill into. Why do you see it as an additional value that the process can run after hours?
Well, because what I meant is that it can run anytime. So sometimes the processes run during the time where basically you have capital markets running processes, and things like it can easily get in the way. And if you can run it after hours, then that means basically if the process runs into exceptions, it can be attended by a low cost or offshore team in a different location. I think what I meant is flexibility when it can run, not necessarily that it can run after hours. If your process must run, let's say at 1 p.m., which a lot of them, for example, are 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. for a start of day report, for example, then you're going to have less flexibility, for example, than if you can run this process anytime, right? There's also cost savings because, if all your processes, for example, have to run at 8 o'clock in the morning, as an example, right? Well, then your bot army, if let's say you're using RPA, they're not going to be multi-threaded. You're going to have to provision another bot.
Yeah.
Right? Yep. Whereas if you have flexibility, right, then you can just use the same bot, but now you're getting better utilization from that same bot, right?
That's right. Yeah. So cost reduction and de-risking, essentially.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, that makes total sense. That's great. This is going to sound like a job interview question. It's not, but as you think back over your career, both being hands-on keyboard and then in a leadership role in automation and automation COEs, Tell me about the project that was maybe most satisfying, that you're most proud of in terms of, what you automated and what came out of it and the impact of the business.
Sure. Yeah, I think the one that meant the most to me, because I've seen the biggest impact, was a workflow solution that we built for a large accounting team, well over 1,000.
Wow.
And we ended up, yielding 120 headcount reduction out of that, and with much better scale, I think 300% scale. So, and this is in a securities industries where you had the trade life cycle. And if you're familiar with the securities industries, they really work as part of a life cycle. You have the trade capture. So this is the trade from the, let's say, the broker or the counterparties. So the trade capture, the trades are captured, and then they go to the book of records. And then there's a pricing team that has to price those trades and positions. And then there's a reconciliation team, which is basically a team that is going to reconcile what the client said that they've traded versus what the broker said that they've traded on their behalf. The clearing, right? So basically matching the two different stories and looking at the exceptions to see, are these legitimate exceptions or just data anomalies? And then the accounting team, once everything is priced and reconciled, comes in and has to do the net asset valuation before handing it off to the investor reporting, who report to the investors for those funds. So it's basically an orchestration of activities across what back then was a very siloed setup, where every organization had its own technologies, had its own processes. And then when it finished its task, it relied on emails and chats to let the other group know that, hey, I'm done for this particular fund, I'm done for this particular group, and so on. And it was very client-centric, if that makes sense. So, for example, the accounting team for this fund did, all the accounting for this particular fund. So the first thing that we did was to actually reorganize the workforce and functionalize the team such that, to no longer be a client-centric team. No, I shouldn't say client-centric, focused or set up team, in the sense that there's no reason for a team to do A to Z for client A. Instead, why don't we just have a team that does all the listed instruments, or all the, for example, the Morgan Stanley trades, and another team that does all the Goldman Sachs trades for all the clients. So instead of you doing A to Z for one client, no, you just do everything to do with Morgan Stanley for all the clients, as an example. So that functionalization, and this is more of a different part of my mandate that I manage, which is more of a process design, process simplification, introducing process reengineering and lean before we do any automation or transformation, right? Because you can reap a lot of benefits by simplifying the process before you automate. And once we've done that, what we did was we created an intelligent workflow that was driven by the movement of the underlying data, such that it detected from the systems if a specific trade or position has been priced, it would automatically alert the next group in the activity that, hey, your task is now up, and it's ready for you to be done. And it intelligently managed the workflow across the global team of 1,000 plus accountants and operation analysts in multiple regions, right? And when I say intelligently, because what it did is it figured out who's the next best person to work on the next task, based on legibility, based on the type of data, and so on. And that transformation was phenomenal because you no longer have people huddling in rooms to figure out, okay, what are we going to do today? What's our resourcing strategy capacity? And even more so, the highlight of how impactful was is that whenever we've had typhoons in Manila, we've had, for example, resource center in Manila offshore, it would be more of a disaster recovery. We were trying to figure out all the directors, how do we manage the workload, right, and transfer it back to the other locations, whether it be in Europe or North America. What that workflow intelligence automation solution did is that it automatically figured out, based on who's online, how to reallocate those tasks. to
Wow.
various members, other locations, again, based on eligibility, based on skill set and so on. So all that headache and overhead management that, used to be in place to figure out, how to respond to specific, BCP situation, business continuity
Yep.
situations, right, is gone. And this is just the icing on the cake, right? On top of the cost reductions, the scale, and the process improvement that it brought.
Yeah. That sounds like an incredible project. That must have been a lot of fun to work on.
Oh yeah, it was challenging. I think
Yeah.
it was quite difficult to absorb, because I'm not a fan of boil the ocean, and then this seemed like
Yeah.
trying to boil the ocean, right? Because it
Nah,
was
that's
huge,
big. Yeah.
right? And it's very, it impacted many stakeholders, many function groups, right? But we managed to get it off the ground because we kind of sort of used agile practices, incrementally building piece by piece, incorporating one more function at a time. But at the end, when you step back and look at it, right, we did kind of boil the ocean from an impact
Yeah.
for that
No,
organization.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's incredible. I wanted to pull a couple of threads. One, I really love that you mentioned the fact that you sort of slowed down and said, are we automating the right process, right? And you took the opportunity to re-engineer the process before memorializing it in an army of bots and software. I see people not doing that constantly, and it's a real missed opportunity.
100%. Yeah, I think, and you find, I think out there's kind of a philosophical debate whether it's do you simplify it and fix it first before you automate it,
Yeah.
or do you just go ahead and automate, right? I've met many colleagues who basically say, well, why waste time, incorporating Lean and Six Sigma when you can just automate the hell out of it, right? And get over and done with.
Yeah.
I tend to be more procedural when it comes to this. I cannot, bring myself to automate something if I have a gut feeling that some of these activities are not even necessary to begin with, right?
Yeah.
I just like to be basically follow kind of a method where I look at the process end to end, simplify it, make sure that it's relevant, make sure that all of it adds value, right?
Yeah.
And then you can go ahead and automate it.
Yeah. You're going to have far fewer headaches down the road managing the bots. To your point, the bots are just workers. They happen to be electronic workers, but they're workers.
Right.
And if you have a bad process, you're going to have a bad management experience with the bots. It's going to happen for sure.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thread I wanted to pull is that one thing that we see over and over again when, we'll build an unstructured data based workflow, and often these workflows still have a human in the loop somewhere. What we see over and over again is just the increase in job satisfaction for the human worker, because they're not doing the laborious stuff as 95% of their job anymore. They're doing error handling and decision making and more strategic thinking. How did that play out in the sort of the big workflow process that you automated, that you discussed?
Yeah, you bring up a very important point, and I would say that this alone is actually competing with customer experience, which is employee experience, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of trends, happening in SaaS. What are the drivers behind digital transformation? Why are we doing this, right? And where it started with me is always about focused on revenue generation, customer, but more recently, I think it's now almost equal, customer experience and employee experience, right? Because if your job as a CEO or the head of operations is to take care of your own employees, they then in return take care of your own clients, right?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
It kind of works that way, and the more satisfied they are, the more engaged they are, and the more that they're willing to spend more valuable time, right? Curating your clients and helping them basically look for opportunities, upselling, and so on. So that is very crucial, and in my experience, it does tend to increase productivity, loyalty to the company, and I think overall the company's output is improved. In my experience with that workflow solution, enterprise workflow solutions that we built, we've seen turnover rates drastically
Yeah.
reduced.
Yeah.
We've seen people that basically have improved their skill set before, never mind that they're now have more time to direct it to, like you said, to more strategic decision making and high value work. But some of them are now able to leave on time to go to their
Yeah.
son's soccer match or daughter's basketball match, right? These are also wins, right? How they feel about their job, right? That we've improved their life, not just their actual what they do at job, but they can actually, because a lot of them were staying over time. If you're doing the stuff manually, if you're doing a lot of processing, you're tired, you're exhausted. It does impact your work-life balance. It does impact how you think about your career and so on. So I've seen that transformation happen firsthand, and I can tell you that it does make a lot of difference.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. I think there's been a lot of fear in the market about the bots replacing humans, but the bots really are just replacing humans doing things that humans probably don't need to be doing. That's been my experience.
Or can't keep up, right?
Yeah, or can't keep up with.
Because
Yeah.
like if you look at the reality is there's more and more data being pumped right into the systems, right? And we just cannot keep up. If you look at unstructured data as an example, which requires a lot of work to access, never mind process, just to access, right?
Yeah.
There's just not enough, human resources to do that, right? And it's increasing because, previously, we traditionally looked at documents only, but any kind of wealth management firm, any kind of financial service firm is now trying to look at the 360 view of their customers, whether it be retail or institutional,
Absolutely.
right? Which includes things like email, video, text, right? All sorts of information needs to be captured, right? I just don't see how you can have your human resources manage all that complexity. It's
Absolutely.
unmanageable.
No, you can't. You can't. You're right. This is a great transition. So you mentioned unstructured data. We've talked about it a few times. Give me your personal, the Meno Hellis definition of unstructured data. How do you explain this to people?
So the way I see it is that it's qualitative data. It's data that is not it cannot be processed or analyzed by conventional data tools. It's stuff like I mentioned, like emails, social media, web pages, or even customer feedback from chatbots and so on. It can be images, and when I say images, it can be PDF scanned documents. For example, these are images, audio, video. And those are very challenging because this type of data is it's raw, it's very unorganized, right?
Yeah.
It cannot be processed, like I said, with your conventional technology or tools, and in most cases, it ends up being inaccessible, right? It just gets stored in its raw format, and from a regulatory point of view, for risk, are very nervous about this because they don't know what kind of data is there, right?
Yeah, what's in there, right?
What's in it, right?
Pandora's
and the regulations,
box.
right? Most of the regulatory bodies, they don't really care how the format of your data is. The regulations apply to every data that you get, and it's kind of your own problem to figure out, right? How to access it and figure out, does it have classified information? How do I figure out, right, who can access it, right? Who should access this data if I don't know what the data is, right? I can't read it, I can't process it. So that's kind of sort of what we mean by unstructured data. It's the format and the way that it gets stored, and the challenges that it brings to organization in terms of provisioning, access, security, risk, and to a lesser extent analytics, because data is a currency, it's insights, right? Most people use data for process improvement, for identifying new opportunities for the company. You can't use that data in its format. You have to have specialized tools, right, to digitize it, and then you can then look at it.
Yeah, you can't put PDFs in an Excel column and then run a VLOOKUP on them, can you?
Right, exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, no, the accessibility is one that I've seen over and over again, where I asked questions of a client like, how many of these documents do they have? And they couldn't even answer that question because they were stored here and they were stored here, and someone else owned this repository, and who knows which ones were duplicates, right? Because things get copied around.
No, that's very true. And this is why actually in many organizations, they refer to unstructured data as dark data because it's dark. You don't really see what it is, right? You don't know how much of it you have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and the easy ways of measuring it, like how big is the file, that doesn't really tell you anything, right? It could be full of meaningless tables.
It might be helpful for infrastructure sizing, right?
Right.
But not necessarily from an operations management, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Where have you seen success with unstructured data?
That's a good question. So it's not, all, hopeless. So
Yeah.
so there are, situations where you can, employ, emerging technologies to access the data and make sense of it, give it meaning, and lessen the time it takes to process and for folks to, let's say, get to it. And the successes that I've seen is people employing, what we call OCR or ICR. So I've had experiences where I've led groups that employed ICR, intelligent character recognition, to process documents for account maintenance services that were basically transactional, whether it be change of address, change of beneficiary. And the solution worked really well as far as classifying what kind of document I'm working with, extracting that data, and then making it available to either an API or RPA to then manipulate it and feed it into a record keeping system or downstream system. So it can be successful. It does require a very well thought out, mapping of the different technologies at the different stages so that they can all function and work together to get to that kind of success and solution, if that makes sense. But it's possible. And I would say not only it's possible, it's becoming popular because a lot of organizations are realizing that, although the assumption out there is that, hey, the demographic is changing, right? And people are becoming more digital savvy. They're ditching paper forms and using, self-serve portals and so on. That's true. But it also at the same time, it's taken a long time. And you have other forms of unstructured data. You've got now you're looking at, you're trying to interact with your clients in every touch point and capture the data because that's valuable information, whether it be emails, whether it be YouTube, whether it be video or any kind of touch point that you have in different channels, right? That too is unstructured. So the percentage of unstructured data from the overall data that you were getting is actually higher now, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but the traditional one, which is the documents, let's say machine type PDFs, or even handwritten, and sometimes I've seen success with, cursive writing. You can still get quite a good solution built, and significant reduction in terms of effort from your processing team. If you have set it up right, you spent the time to train it, to supervise it, and you've used, I would say, good technology, and you partnered with somebody who is familiar with that technology that can help you jumpstart this.
Yeah, you raise a number of good points there. One of them that I wanted to highlight was you highlighted some of the unique challenges of unstructured data, and I think one of them is training. You have to train. Unlike a column in a spreadsheet, which sort of tells you what's in the column, unstructured data, you have to bring your own intelligence to it, right? Like, this is what I care about in this document or this audio file or whatever it is. And so as you've undertaken unstructured data projects, how have you pitched the need for training and building that intelligence into the business?
It's a good question. I think because that's often missed, right? As I pointed out earlier, the nature of the technology does require training for it to be effective and highly successful. But people assume that it's just another technology, and most technologies don't need training. You just deploy it, and it does specific, specific activities, right? So if you have, for example, a network monitoring, for example, you just deploy it and it starts monitoring your network, right? That's how it does. That's different for the document management and OCR and ICR, right? There is an expectation that you need to give it samples and train it, right? And the way we've approached this is that we've explained to them that even the human eye can make mistakes, right? So like people, when I look at a document, especially if it's handwritten, right, I can't tell I can't tell sometimes my own wife's handwritten notes, right? And I have to phone her, ask like, what did you say, here? So if that is the reality, right, why should we expect the machines, right, to know everything, right? You really need to sort of point out to them, this name is is Smith, for example. This is John Fu, or that way they know what the word John looks like next time it sees it, right? And the technology is getting better, I think, but it's in your own interest to train it so that you customize it. Maybe you have the quality of the PDFs that you're getting, because every case is going to be different, right? There's no, you cannot take a solution that has been trained by a different organization, right? You kind of have to train it based on the data that you get, based on the quality that you have to deal with, right? And maybe the quality is determined by your own client profiles. If you're dealing with many seniors, maybe then the quality is going to be handwritten, perhaps, versus if you're dealing with most of your investors is young investors, there might be machine type PDFs. It varies significantly. And that's why I say that it has to be unique. It has to basically be done at your organization. It cannot be, acquired somewhere else. And it's no different than, culture. It's no different than you bring in your own. If you bring in somebody who onboarded them, right, you train them, right. There's specific skills they expect them to have. If you're asking for somebody to know Python, for example, they should know Python, right? Doesn't matter where they come from, right? But if you want them to know how things get done here, whether basically, how to navigate, the organization, how to do governance, right? That's very specific to your organization.
It is. Yeah, and your people have to learn it. So of course the bots have to learn it, right? And so you have to teach them well.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I imagine at some point when she's talking to an investment manager, it's going to be Snapchat. Like,
Probably,
unstructured data is only going to proliferate. To your earlier point,
and maybe there's no chat; it's just emojis, and they have to figure out. Who knows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I hadn't thought of that. Like, unstructured data processing for memes. That's probably what's coming.
Well, the industry has to, to evolve to meet the needs of folks out there, right? So it's I wouldn't be surprised, but I think, I'm impressed with the technology out there. I think it's catching up. There's a lot of, smart people that are trying to solve problems. And I've worked with organizations such as Mass Challenge. I'm not sure if you've heard of them. It's a startup accelerator. And I've seen a lot of solutions out there that are trying to solve, very unique problems to organizations. So I think, multinationals are now more comfortable dealing with smaller startups and boutique vendors.
For sure.
That's a big change from, let's say, 10 years ago, where much of the solutions were built from a select number of large vendors.
10 years ago, no one gets fired for hiring like IBM Watson, right? It's a household name, but that's changed a bit. You also raise a good point in that the tools are catching up, and I think the market is catching up to the fact that, just like with RPA and more conventional automations, there is still a place for the human in the process. Straight through processing on every document is not realistic right now. And while maybe Tesla will eventually build fully automated cars, I think humans are going to be behind the wheel for quite a while. And I think the market's realizing that with business critical processes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, if anything, what the technology, I think, is doing or is going to do is to really make the human loop interactions richer, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So to give you an example, what I mean by that is that if you're a wealth advisor, then your distributor or your dealer is using technology to manage your investors, and you have this 360 view of your client, you can easily get an alert, right, as the advisor that your client just had a baby, for example, or their family circumstances have changed, right? Then in response, either automatically or you can decide to offer them different investments now that they have a baby, for example, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a family education fund, just as an example, right? You couldn't do that before the technology advances, right? If you have, like this 360 view of your client, capturing every interaction, capturing every change in their profile, whether they've changed their address and they moved to a different location, or their family has changed and then now have a newborn, right? You can take advantage of that information that's now being, immediately in real time curated and given to the advisor to take advantage of, and use it as an opportunity to, further develop that, relationship with their client. So I think the technology is making the human in the loop interaction much more valuable, much more richer than it was before, right?
Absolutely.
Another example for like where I've seen, it's probably not happening, but it's being talked a lot about. If for example, that every time the market goes down, it's been going down significantly, right? Certain number of your clients start checking their portfolio, right?
Yeah.
You can automate basically a message to comfort them, right? So to let's say you have hundreds of clients, right? So now you can be very more personal, right? You're delivering more personalized services, right, to your clients that you weren't able to do previously. You can send a personalized message saying, "Look, I've checked your portfolio. Don't worry, don't make any changes, right? We'll, stay put, and then the market will catch up or something like this, whichever matches it is, right?" But that's one of several things that you can do using technology.
Or it could say, hey, dum dum, don't put all of your retirement in crypto, for example.
Exactly.
This has been great. We're coming up on about 5 minutes left, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I want to ask you a couple of more provocative questions to close it out. So there's scary data out there that would suggest that less than 10% of all AI and automation initiatives get from sort of like the lab bench or development environment to production. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of skepticism, unfortunately. I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say fear, maybe just doubt that the technology isn't there. And I think, where that is true is in organizations that have had rigid structures. And what I mean by that is that there isn't really space or capacity for experimentation. They've not set up digital factories or incubation teams that can experiment with what the emerging technologies out there can do. And those organizations, I think, are missing out on big opportunities because, I think there's been, maybe perhaps, false promises in terms of AI and what it can do. There's always going to be a group of people that's promising that technology will do more than what it currently does, right? That's true for everything, right? And not just technology, anything, whether it be investments. There are investment advisors who will say that, your portfolio will be up 15% every year, right? And that's not going to be the case or something like this, right? But that's not to take away from the hard fact that, machine learning, NLP, AI, all these technologies have a lot to deliver. And if used correctly, and if used, wisely, it can actually transform the business. It can make a significant improvement. And I think the key factors, like we talked earlier, is to really start small. Experiment was something that you're comfortable in terms of failure, and be ready to course correct and step out if it doesn't work, right? And work with an advisor and a partner. I think if you go it alone, especially if you're onboarding a technology that your in-house expertise have not had any exposure to, or an emerging technology that you're not familiar with, it's important that you partner with an advisor and somebody who has done this before, so that they can bring in lessons learned. They can bring in maybe perhaps experiences from other companies, how they've done it. That way, you're basically increasing the likelihood of you being successful. So that skepticism, unfortunately, is because it's just that a lot of people are doing it and they're trying to dabble with experiment it, but then when it fails, they don't say we didn't do it right. They say the technology sucks, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yep. No,
Yeah.
the idea of working with a partner is just great advice.
Yeah.
There's, I think maybe 5 years ago, you probably had to go it alone, especially if you were trying to tackle unstructured data. But now you
Mhm.
don't. You should be talking to experts. They're out there,
Right.
and some of them are right here.
Thank you.
So
Yeah. I mean, I think
yeah,
there are many experts out there and there are many advisors. I think what's important is that you team up with somebody that can
yeah,
guide you throughout the process, right? And it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. I actually, I'm a big fan of if you're signing up with an emerging technology, let's say a vendor, that you sign up with their professional services to
yep,
jumpstart.
agreed,
I think that
100%.
that's helpful. A lot of folks feel that they're being taken advantage of when they're signing, let's say, a statement of work. We thought we're going to be buying the software, now we're buying the professional services. It makes sense. Once you're comfortable, you have a mature, you have your COE set up and everything, you can step away. But don't go it alone if you're not comfortable.
No, that's right. Returning to one of your earlier points, you should have a mindset that you're building a stack and
Yeah.
right tool for the right job. And if you don't have the expertise, be honest about it. And most of the vendors out there, including, Indico Data, we want to use our professional services to enable you, because ultimately we want you to have the skill set so that you can do more on the platform, right? And with
Right.
the
Yeah.
tools.
And I think that is, in line with my experience. A lot of these, SaaS-based, companies understood they make their profit from, the subscription based
Yep.
revenue. So they're not really interested in the professional services. It's just that for the SaaS subscription to be successful and for you to use the product correctly, there has to be some kind of professional services to get you started, right? Get you off the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great insight. Final question. I'm just going to open it up to you. What is your number one piece of advice for the COE leader out there?
The number one advice I would say is that it's really to keep an open mind about the various technologies out there. Make sure that is whatever the COE does is aligned with an overall organizational strategy. It
Yep.
cannot function on its own. So that means basically it has to trickle from the top. The top has to have a digital transformation strategy that is, supported by a business architecture unit. And then one of those capabilities is the COE that is supporting those, objectives. If you don't have that sponsorship, if you don't have that alignment, I think no matter what tools you bring in, no matter what talent you bring in, you're bound to fail. So I can't stress enough the alignment with the organizational strategy, and making sure that you have a clear purpose and vision of what you're trying to do, and it's aligned with the leaders that you're trying to serve, whether it be the operational leaders or the chief strategy officer or the chief digital officer. There has
Yep.
to be perfect alignment. It cannot operate as some kind of under the desk business solutions team or some kind of a
Yeah.
process automation team that they're basically dabbling in Python. I think those can create a lot of risks. They can create a lot of problems. They can easily become disintegrated and distracted as they get pulled into different projects. They can have or face funding issues. So all sorts of problems can happen. But if you have that alignment with the organization, so that it's part of an enterprise strategy, then I think it's more successful. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. All right. Wise words from a wise man.
Thank you.
This has been Unstructured Unlocked. I've been your host, Chris Wells. And once again, I want to thank my guest, Meno Hellis. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Chris, for having me. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, you too. Best of luck out there automating everything.